Good evening and welcome to Bedtime Sleep Story. Tonight, let us settle in together and drift slowly down the long green ribbon of the Nile into the quiet world of ancient Egypt. This is a land of warm stone and slow rivers, of temples that watch the stars for thousands of years, and of ordinary people who woke before dawn to the smell of bread and silt. We will wander past pyramids and painted tombs, past scribes bent over reed pens, past gardeners counting figs in the cool of the morning. There is nothing here to hurry for. Every story has already happened long ago, and all of it can simply wash over you like the river at dusk. If these quiet journeys help you rest, a gentle like or a follow lets other tired minds find a softer place to land too. But for now, there is nothing you need to do. Loosen your shoulders, let your eyes grow heavy, and let the day fall away behind you. Let your breathing slow to the pace of the water. And as the lamps are lit along the riverbank and the heat lifts from the sand, let us begin. Ancient Egypt lasted longer than almost any civilization in human history. From the first kings who united the river valley to the last of the pharaohs, more than 3,000 years unfolded along the Nile. That is a span so vast that Cleopatra, who is often imagined as ancient, in fact lived closer in time to the first moon landing than to the building of the Great Pyramid. The Egyptians themselves felt this depth. Their priests kept long lists of kings stretching back into the dim past, and their temples were already old when Greek travelers came to marvel at them. Stone monuments that we call ancient were ancient even to the ancients. For most of those centuries, life simply repeated its gentle rhythm. The river rose, the fields were sown, the grain was gathered, and the people gave thanks. Time moved in slow, certain circles, like a boat drifting home on a familiar current. The whole of Egypt was a gift of a single river. Beyond the thin green strip watered by the Nile lay nothing but desert in every direction, pale and silent under the sun. So, the river was not merely useful, it was everything. Each year it rose and spilled across the fields, leaving behind a layer of dark, rich mud that made the soil among the most fertile on earth. The Egyptians called their country the Black Land, after that dark soil, and the desert beyond it the Red Land. They did not fear the flood. They welcomed it, measured it, and built their calendar around it. A good flood meant full granaries and quiet bellies through the winter. The river gave them fish, reeds for boats and baskets, mud for bricks, and a smooth road that carried travelers north and south. Without it, there would have been only sand. The Egyptians measured the year by the rising of a single star. Each summer, after weeks of absence from the sky, the bright star Sirius would reappear just before dawn on the eastern horizon. This quiet event arrived at almost the same moment as the swelling of the Nile, and so it became the herald of the new year. Priests watched the horizon carefully for that first faint glimmer, and when it came, the season of the flood was near. From this, the Egyptians built a calendar of 365 days, divided into 3 seasons of flood, planting, and harvest. It was one of the earliest calendars of its kind, and remarkably close to the true length of the year. A whole civilization arranged its work, its festivals, and its hopes around the gentle return of one star to the morning sky. For most Egyptians, life was shaped by farming, not by kings or wars. The vast majority of people were not warriors or priests, but gardeners and field hands, living in small mud brick villages near the water. Their days followed the seasons closely. When the flood withdrew, They pressed seeds into the soft mud and let the sun do its slow work. They raised wheat and barley for bread and beer, and tended onions, leeks, beans, lettuce, and melons in tidy garden plots. Cattle, goats, and ducks wandered between the houses. The work was hard but familiar, and the rhythm rarely changed from one generation to the next. A farmer might spend his whole life within sight of the same bend in the river, knowing each field, each canal, and each shady palm. It was a quiet, rooted existence, lived close to the soil and the water. Bread and beer were the heart of every Egyptian meal. These two foods, both made from grain, fed everyone from laborers to nobles. Bread was baked in countless shapes, sometimes flavored with dates, honey, or seeds, and it was so central to life that workers were often paid in loaves. Beer was thick, mild, and nourishing, more like a soft porridge than a modern drink, and it was safe to consume when river water was not. Even children drank a weak form of it. Great quantities flowed from temple breweries and household kitchens alike. Together, bread and beer were the steady foundation of the Egyptian table, the reliable fuel that built tombs and temples. A common blessing wished a person bread and beer in abundance, a simple hope for a full stomach and a peaceful day, repeated quietly across the centuries like a prayer. The pharaoh was believed to be a living link between the people and the gods. He was not seen merely as a ruler, but as a divine figure whose duty was to keep the world in balance. The Egyptians called this balance Mat, a sense of truth, order, and harmony that held back chaos. By performing the right rituals, honoring the gods, and governing justly, the pharaoh kept the sun rising and the river flowing. In art, he was shown larger than everyone around him, calm and timeless, often with the gods at his side. Yet behind the golden image was a human being who could grow tired, fall ill, and worry over the harvest. The role was heavy. On his shoulders, it was believed, rested the safety of the entire land. To the farmer in the field, the distant king was the quiet guarantee that tomorrow would be like today. The Great Pyramid was the tallest building made by human hands for nearly 4,000 years. Raised at Giza for the pharaoh Khufu, it once stood smooth and gleaming, cased in polished white limestone that caught the sun. It was built from more than 2 million stone blocks, each one cut, hauled, and set into place with astonishing care. For thousands of years, no structure on Earth rose higher. Cathedrals and towers would not surpass it until the late Middle Ages. And yet, for all its size, it was a tomb, built to carry one man safely into the next world. Standing before it, even now, travelers fall quiet. The sheer patience it represents is difficult to hold in the mind. Countless mornings of labor, season after season, stone after stone, all rising slowly toward a single still point against the desert sky. The pyramids were not built by enslaved masses, as old stories often claimed. The workers who raised them were, for the most part, skilled laborers and seasonal farmhands who came to work when the flood covered their fields. They were housed, fed, and cared for, living in organized villages near the building sites. Archaeologists have found their bakeries, their breweries, and even their bones, which show healed injuries tended by physicians. They worked in teams with proud names, scratched playfully onto the stones. It was demanding work, but it was also a kind of national project, a shared effort that fed families and honored the gods. The image of endless whips and suffering belongs more to legend than to history. The truth is gentler and, in its way, more remarkable. Ordinary people, organized with great skill, building something meant to last forever. Egyptian workers may have left us some of the world's first recorded labor strikes. During the reign of Rameses III, the craftsmen who built the royal tombs were paid in grain, their wages a steady ration of food. When those rations arrived late, the workers did something quietly revolutionary. They stopped working, gathered together, and refused to continue until they were paid what they were owed. Scribes recorded the whole affair on papyrus, noting the complaints and the negotiations. These were not enslaved people, but respected artisans who knew their worth, living in a village built just for them. Their protest was orderly and reasonable, a request for fairness rather than a rebellion. Across more than 3,000 years, their voices still reach us, calm and insistent, reminding us that the people who built wonders also worried about supper and expected to be treated justly. The Egyptians wrote with beautiful little pictures called hieroglyphs. This script, used for temples and tombs, was made of hundreds of small signs: owls and reeds, feet and water ripples, suns and seated figures. Some pictures stood for sounds, others for whole ideas, and skilled scribes wove them together into elegant lines. Carving them was slow, careful work, almost like painting, and the results were as much art as writing. For everyday matters, scribes used a quicker, flowing form, written in ink on papyrus. The knowledge of reading and writing belonged to a small, respected class, and it opened doors to comfort and influence. For centuries after Egypt's temples fell silent, no one could read these signs at all. Their meaning was lost, and the pictures kept their secrets, until at last, long afterward, patient scholars learned once more how to listen to them. A single carved stone unlocked the lost language of the pharaohs. For more than 1,000 years, no one in the world could read hieroglyphs. The knowledge had simply faded away. Then a slab of dark stone was discovered, carved with the same message in 3 scripts, including hieroglyphs and Greek. Because scholars could still read the Greek, they had at last a key. Slowly, painstakingly, by comparing the texts, a young scholar pieced together the sounds and meanings of the ancient signs. It was patient work, full of false starts and quiet evenings by candlelight. When understanding finally came, an entire civilization began to speak again. Names, prayers, recipes, and letters that had been silent for ages could be heard once more. One weathered stone, plowed up by chance, became the doorway through which the whole voice of ancient Egypt returned to the world. The Egyptians believed the heart, not the brain, was the center of thought. To them, the heart was the seat of wisdom, memory, emotion, and character. It was where a person truly lived. The brain, by contrast, was considered of little importance. During the careful preparation of a body for burial, the heart was usually left in place, treasured and protected, while the brain was quietly removed and discarded. In the next world, it was believed, the heart would be weighed to measure the worth of a life. A good heart, light as a feather, meant a soul at peace. And so, people spoke of following their hearts, of hearts that were heavy or glad, much as we still do today. They listened inward to that steady beat and trusted it as the truest part of themselves, the quiet keeper of who they were. Mummification was a long, gentle act of love and faith. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed its body to survive in the afterlife, and so they learned to preserve the dead with great care. The process took many weeks. The body was cleaned, treated, and dried with natural salts until it would no longer decay. then wrapped slowly in layer upon layer of fine linen. Priests murmured prayers over each stage, and small protective charms were tucked between the wrappings. It was solemn, unhurried work, carried out in quiet workshops near the river. Far from being grim, it was an expression of hope, a belief that death was not an ending, but a long passage, and that the body, lovingly kept, would house the soul again. In this way, the Egyptians turned their grief into patient ritual and their fear of death into a gentle promise of continuing. The Egyptians had a god for nearly every part of life. Their world was alive with divine presences, more than 1,000 of them, woven into the rhythm of each day. There was a god of the sun who crossed the sky in a golden boat, a goddess who protected mothers and children in the home, gods of writing, of music, of the harvest, and of the quiet dead. Some were shown with the heads of animals, a jackal, a falcon, a cat, an ibis. These were not seen as strange, but as natural signs of each god's nature. People prayed to the great gods in vast temples and to small household gods beside their own beds. Faith was not a single day's duty, but a constant, comfortable companionship. The divine was simply part of the furniture of life, present in the river, the sun, the hearth, and the soft dark of sleep. Cats were cherished and protected throughout ancient Egypt. These gentle animals earned their place first by guarding granaries and homes from mice and snakes, but they soon became far more than helpers. They were welcomed into families, given names, and adorned with small collars and rings. A goddess with the head of a cat watched over the home, over mothers, and over joy itself. Cats appeared in paintings, curled beneath chairs at family feasts, perfectly at ease. When a beloved cat died, the household might mourn deeply, and the animal could be carefully preserved and laid to rest with honor. To harm a cat, even by accident, was a serious matter. In few places in history have these soft, watchful creatures been so loved. To picture an Egyptian evening is to picture a cat asleep in the lamplight, warm and untroubled, perfectly at home. The Egyptians invented one of the world's first forms of paper. From the tall papyrus reeds that grew in the marshes along the Nile, they made smooth, durable sheets for writing. The stalks were cut into thin strips, layered crosswise pressed and dried into pale, flexible pages. Rolled into scrolls, this papyrus carried the records of an entire civilization. Tax accounts and temple hymns, love poems and medical notes, letters between distant friends. It was light, portable, and long-lasting, far easier to store than clay or stone. The very word paper descends from papyrus, a quiet echo of those riverside reeds. Whole libraries of such scrolls once existed, holding the gathered thoughts of generations. Much has been lost to time and damp, but enough survives that we can still read the ordinary words of people who lived thousands of years ago, written on plants pulled from a slow green river. Egyptian doctors were among the most respected healers of the ancient world. Their knowledge, gathered over centuries and written down on papyrus, blended careful observation with prayer. They could set broken bones, treat wounds, and prepare remedies from honey, herbs, and minerals. Honey in particular was used on injuries, and we now know it genuinely helps to keep them clean. Some physicians specialized, tending only to the eyes, the teeth, or the stomach, an early form of the specialists we know today. Their writings describe examining a patient gently, noting the symptoms, and offering a considered judgment. Of course, much of their practice was mixed with charms and spells, for they saw no firm line between medicine and faith. Yet their reputation spread far beyond Egypt, and foreign kings sometimes sent for Egyptian doctors. In their quiet, practical care for the body, they were reaching slowly towards science. Both men and women in Egypt wore makeup, and it was more than mere decoration. The most striking was the dark eye paint, ground from minerals and lined boldly around the eyes. It gave the famous almond-eyed look seen in so much Egyptian art, but it also served real purposes. The dark rims helped shield the eyes from the harsh glare of the sun, much as athletes still smudge dark marks beneath their eyes today. The minerals were even thought to protect against eye infections, and there may be some truth in it. Makeup was kept in lovely little jars and applied with small sticks, part of the gentle ritual of getting ready. Rich and poor alike used it, and it carried a sense of protection and even of the sacred. To line the eyes was to greet the day prepared, shielded against the brightness of the world. The Egyptians loved board games and played them for thousands of years. The most popular was a game called Senet, played on a grid of 30 squares with small pieces moved according to the throw of casting sticks. Families played it in the evenings, friends wagered on it, and it was enjoyed by everyone from children to kings. Beautiful Senate boards have been found in tombs, sometimes finely made of wood and inlay, placed there so the dead could keep playing in the next life. Over time, the game took on a deeper meaning, becoming a gentle symbol of the soul's journey through the afterworld, square by square toward peace. But at heart, it remains simple fun, a way to pass a warm evening in good company. To imagine an Egyptian at rest is to imagine two players bent over a board by lamplight, unhurried, enjoying the quiet game. Egyptian women held more rights than women in many later societies. They could own property, run businesses, and inherit wealth in their own names. A woman could buy and sell land, lend grain, go to court, and make her own will. Marriage was often a partnership of equals, recorded in simple agreements, and a wife kept her own possessions. Some women brewed beer or wove linen for trade, while others managed estates or served in the temples. A few rose to extraordinary power, ruling as queens and even as pharaohs. While daily life was not perfectly equal and most authority still rested with men, Egyptian women moved through their world with a freedom that surprised foreign visitors. In the cool of their homes, they managed households, raised children, and made decisions that mattered. Their voices steady and respected within the gentle order of Egyptian life. A woman once ruled Egypt as pharaoh and brought it great prosperity. Her name was Hatshepsut, and she governed not as a queen beside a king, but as a king in her own right. For about 2 decades, she held the throne, and her reign was a time of peace, building, and trade, rather than war. She sent grand expeditions to distant lands to bring back incense, gold, ebony, and rare trees planted in her temple gardens. That temple, rising in graceful terraces against the cliff, remains one of the most beautiful in all of Egypt. In statues, she is sometimes shown wearing the traditional false beard of a pharaoh, a symbol of the office rather than a disguise. Capable and far-sighted, she steered her country gently and well. Long after her death, the memory of her quiet, prosperous reign lingered in the stones she left behind. The boy King Tutankhamun is famous today mostly because his tomb survived. In his own time, he was a minor pharaoh who came to the throne as a child and died young, leaving little mark on history. For thousands of years, he was almost forgotten. What makes him so well known now is a quiet miracle of survival. His small tomb, hidden and overlooked, escaped the robbers who emptied so many others. When it was finally opened, it was found nearly intact, filled with golden treasures, furniture, and everyday objects meant for the next life. Among them was a breathtaking golden mask, made in his likeness, calm and serene. Through this one untouched tomb, a forgotten boy became the most famous of all the pharaohs. It is a gentle irony of history that the smallest of kings should in the end shine the brightest. Egyptian kings were buried in a hidden valley, not in pyramids. After the age of the Great Pyramids had passed, rulers grew wary of the way such monuments advertised their treasures to thieves. So they chose instead a remote, sun-baked valley across the river from the city of Thebes, a place of silence and stone. There, deep tombs were cut straight into the rock, their entrances hidden and their walls painted with prayers and bright scenes of the afterlife. Workers labored in secret to carve and decorate these chambers. The valley held the resting places of many pharaohs, sheltered, it was hoped, from prying hands. The plan was only partly successful, for robbers still found their way in. Yet the painted corridors remain, glowing with color in the lamplight, quiet galleries beneath the desert where kings were laid to rest far from the noise of the world. The Great Sphinx has watched over Giza for thousands of years. Carved from a single ridge of limestone, it has the body of a resting lion and the face of a king, gazing calmly toward the rising sun. It is enormous, longer than many buildings, and yet it sits in perfect stillness, as it has for some 4,500 years. For long stretches of history it lay buried up to its neck in drifting sand, only its great head showing above the desert. Ancient travelers told stories about it, and one young prince is said to have dreamed beside it of becoming king. Its nose is gone now, lost to time, but its quiet dignity remains. To stand before the Sphinx at dusk is to feel the centuries settle softly around you as the old guardian keeps its long, patient watch. The Egyptians believed in a rich and detailed life after death. To them, death was not an ending, but a journey to another country, much like their own, but free from pain. The soul would travel through the underworld, passing tests and dangers, guided by prayers and spells. If all went well, it would reach a peaceful land of fields and rivers, where the dead could farm, feast, and rest among loved ones forever. This hope shaped almost everything they did, from the building of tombs to the keeping of the body. They filled their graves with food, furniture, and small figures to serve them in the next world. Far from being morbid, their view of death was warm and hopeful, a belief that the gentle rhythms of life would simply continue elsewhere. They prepared for that journey as one might pack carefully for a long and welcome trip home. The heart of the dead was believed to be weighed against a feather. In the underworld, the Egyptians imagined a great hall where each soul faced a final, gentle judgment. The heart, thought to hold the record of a person's whole life, was placed on a scale and balanced against the feather of truth. A life lived kindly and honestly would leave the heart light, and the scales would rest in balance. Then, the soul could pass on into peace. The God who recorded the result stood by with his reed pen, noting the outcome with care. This was not imagined as a cruel test, but as a fair one, an accounting weighed with mercy. The image is a quiet and beautiful one, a single feather, a steady scale, and the hope that a gentle heart would prove light enough to carry its owner safely home. Small figures called shabtis were placed in tombs to work for the dead. The Egyptians believed that the afterlife, though peaceful, might still ask for labor in its fields. So they prepared little servant statues, sometimes only a few inches tall, shaped like wrapped figures and inscribed with a short spell. If the dead were ever called upon to work, these figures would answer in their place and do the task. Some wealthy tombs held hundreds of them, one for nearly every day of the year, neatly arranged in boxes. They were made of clay, stone, or shining blue faience, simple and serene. It is a touching idea that even in a perfect afterlife, one might wish for a little help, and so be surrounded by a quiet host of small helpers, ready and willing, so that the soul itself could rest in ease. The internal organs were preserved in special jars beside the body. During mummification, certain organs were removed, dried, and kept safe, for they too were thought to be needed in the afterlife. They were placed in 4 containers, often called canopic jars, each watched over by a protective spirit. The lids were carved in the shapes of guardians, sometimes a human head, sometimes the heads of a baboon, a falcon, or a jackal. The jars were arranged carefully near the coffin, beautiful and solemn. The heart, most precious of all, was usually left within the body itself. There was nothing grim in this to the Egyptians. It was simply thorough care, a way of keeping every part of a person whole and ready for the long journey ahead. Even in death, nothing was wasted and nothing forgotten, all of it tended with the same patient love. The scarab beetle was one of Egypt's most beloved symbols. To us, it is a humble dung beetle, but to the Egyptians, it was a small miracle. They watched it roll a ball of dung across the ground and saw in it an image of the sun, pushed each day across the sky. And because young beetles seemed to emerge from the ball as if from nowhere, the scarab became a sign of new life and rebirth. So they carved its shape into countless little charms, worn for luck and protection, and tucked among the wrappings of the dead. Made of stone or glazed in shining blue and green, scarabs were among the most common of all Egyptian objects. A creature most people overlook became, in Egypt, a gentle promise that life renews itself, that the sun returns each morning, and that endings give way to beginnings. Egyptian houses were built of mud brick and stayed cool in the heat. Ordinary homes were made from bricks of Nile mud and straw, dried in the sun, simple and inexpensive. Thick walls and small, high windows kept the fierce daytime sun outside and held the cool within. Floors were often of packed earth, and roofs were flat, made of palm logs and reeds. On hot nights, families would climb up to sleep on the roof beneath the stars, where the air moved more freely. Inside, rooms were modest and tidy, with low benches, reed mats, storage jars, and a small shrine to the household gods. Many homes had a walled garden or courtyard where bread was baked and children played. These were humble dwellings, but comfortable and well suited to the land. To rest in such a house was to be cool, quiet, and close to the gentle hum of family life. The Egyptians enjoyed gardens and prized shade and greenery. In a land of sun and sand, a cool green garden was a true luxury and a deep pleasure. Those who could afford it laid out gardens with care, rectangular pools for fish and lotus flowers, neat rows of vegetables and trees for shade and fruit. Date palms, fig trees, pomegranates, and grapevines offered both food and relief from the heat. Flowers were grown for their beauty and their scent, and to weave into garlands for feasts and offerings. A garden pool, still and cool in the evening, was a place to sit and rest, listening to birds among the leaves. Even the gods were given gardens at their temples. To the Egyptians, a patch of green beside the water was close to paradise, and their idea of the perfect afterlife looked much like a beautiful, well-watered garden. Linen was the cloth of Egypt, light and cool against the skin. Made from the flax plant grown in the fields, Linen was spun and woven into fabric prized across the ancient world. It suited the hot climate perfectly, breathing easily and washing clean. Most clothing was simple and white, wrapped kilts for men, straight dresses for women, comfortable and unfussy. The finest linen could be woven so sheer and delicate that it was almost like gauze, worn by nobles and offered to the gods. Linen also wrapped the dead, layer upon careful layer. Spinning and weaving were everyday household crafts, often done by women, the soft rhythm of the loom, a familiar sound. To dress in fresh linen on a warm morning was one of life's simple comforts, clean and light, perfectly matched to the gentle pace of the Egyptian day. Egyptians of all classes loved jewelry and bright ornament. Gold, beads, and colored stones adorned both the living and the dead, worn for beauty and for protection. Broad collars of many strands, bracelets, rings, and earrings caught the light against white linen. The colors carried meaning: deep blue for the heavens, green for new life, red for energy and strength. Even those who could not afford gold wore charms of glazed faience or simple beads, just as treasured. Much jewelry was also protective, shaped into the forms of gods, eyes, or scarabs to keep the wearer safe. The dead were buried with their finest pieces for the journey ahead. To picture an Egyptian dressed for a festival is to picture a gleam of gold and a glow of blue and green, color layered upon color, a quiet celebration of life worn close against the skin. Sweet honey was Egypt's treasured sugar, gathered from kept bees. Long before sugar was known, honey was the great sweetener, used in cooking, in medicine, and in offerings to the gods. The Egyptians were among the earliest beekeepers, raising bees in long tubes of dried mud stacked in rows. Beekeepers are shown in tomb paintings, tending the hives and gathering the comb, even carrying hives on boats up and down the river to follow the flowering season. Honey sweetened cakes and drinks, soothed sore throats and dressed wounds. It was precious enough to be listed among valuable goods and offered to temples in sealed jars. Because honey keeps almost forever, jars of it have even been found, still good, in ancient tombs. It is a gentle thought that something as soft and sweet as honey should last across the ages, quietly outlasting kings and the kingdoms they ruled. The Egyptians made a brilliant blue color that has lasted for ages. By heating sand, copper, and other minerals together, they created a vivid blue pigment, one of the first artificial colors ever made by people. This Egyptian blue glowed on walls, statues, and painted coffins, a precious hue linked with the sky, the river, and the divine. It was used for thousands of years and traded far beyond Egypt's borders. Remarkably, the color has proved astonishingly durable, still bright on objects buried for millennia, and scientists today even study its unusual properties. The same love of color glazed their beads and amulets in shining blue-green faience. To the Egyptian eye, color was not mere decoration, but meaning made visible. That they could capture the blue of the heavens in a powder, and that it should still shine after thousands of years, speaks of a quiet and lasting skill. Children in Egypt played with toys much like children everywhere. Among the dry sands, archaeologists have found little balls of leather and reed, spinning tops, carved animals, and dolls with movable limbs. There were toy crocodiles whose jaws could open and close, and small figures of bakers and workers that moved when a string was pulled. Children played games of catch and leapfrog, swam in the river under careful eyes, and ran through the dusty lanes of their villages. For the very young, Life was a time of play and freedom, often spent without much clothing in the warm climate. They kept pets, splashed in the shallows, and learned by copying their parents at work. Across all the distance of years, these small toys speak softly of something unchanged. That childhood, then as now, was a time of laughter, imagination, and simple, happy games beneath the sun. Some Egyptian children went to school to become scribes. While most learned their parents' trades, a fortunate few, usually boys, were sent to school to learn the demanding art of reading and writing. It was a path to a respected and comfortable life. The lessons were long and strict. Students copied texts over and over onto pottery shards and smooth flakes of stone, practicing the hundreds of signs until their hands knew them. Teachers urged them on with proverbs, praising the scribes' clean, easy work over the hard labor of the fields. To become a scribe was to escape the plow and the brickyard, to earn a place in temples or palaces, keeping records and writing letters. The training took years of patient effort, but those who finished joined a small, valued class, their skill a quiet treasure that opened doors closed to almost everyone else. Egypt traded across great distances for the goods it lacked. Though the Nile Valley was rich in grain and stone, it had to look abroad for other treasures. Ships and caravans brought cedar wood from the coast of the eastern sea, prized incense and gold from lands to the south, copper from desert mines, and lapis lazuli, the deep blue stone, from faraway mountains. In return, Egypt offered grain, linen, papyrus, and fine crafts. Great trading expeditions were celebrated events, recorded proudly on temple walls. One famous voyage to a distant southern land brought back myrrh trees, exotic animals, ebony, and gold, all paraded home in triumph. Through this slow exchange, Egypt connected with a wide world beyond its deserts. Goods, ideas, and people moved along the rivers and roads, and the quiet markets of Egypt held treasures gathered from lands their people would never see. The Egyptians perfumed themselves with sweet oils and scented cones. In the heat, fragrant oils were both a pleasure and a comfort, softening the skin and masking the smells of daily life. Perfumes were made by steeping flowers, herbs, and resins in oil, producing rich scents of lily, lotus, myrrh, and cinnamon. These were precious goods, kept in lovely jars and offered to the gods. At feasts, guests are shown in paintings wearing cones of scented fat upon their heads, which slowly melted in the warmth and released their perfume over the evening. Whether such cones were truly worn or were a symbol in art, the love of fragrance was real and deep. To anoint oneself with sweet oil was a small daily luxury, a way of greeting the day refreshed. The air of an Egyptian feast must have been soft with the scent of flowers and warm spice. Wigs were worn by many Egyptians for both beauty and comfort. In the fierce heat, many people, both men and women, kept their hair cut very short or shaved entirely, which was cool and clean. Over this, they wore wigs of human hair or plant fiber, styled into elegant braids and curls. A fine wig was a mark of status, carefully made and scented with perfumed oils. It could be set aside at night and dressed by servants for special occasions. Beyond fashion, shaving and wig wearing helped keep the scalp cool and free of lice in the warm climate. Priests in particular shaved their whole bodies for the sake of purity. So the sleek, styled hair seen in Egyptian art was often not hair at all, but a carefully crafted wig lifted off at the day's end like a hat, leaving the wearer cool and at ease. The very first pyramid began as a stack of stone platforms. Before the smooth-sided pyramids of Giza, An architect named Imhotep designed something entirely new for the pharaoh Djoser. He took the low rectangular tomb of earlier kings and set 6 of them, each smaller than the last, one upon another, rising in great steps toward the sky. This step pyramid was the first large building in the world, made entirely of cut stone, and it still stands today. Imhotep was so admired for his genius that, long after his death, he was honored almost as a god of wisdom and healing. The step pyramid was a bold experiment, a first reaching upward in stone, and from it the idea grew until later builders smoothed the steps into the perfect slopes we know. It all began with one thoughtful man, stacking stone upon stone in a wholly new way. The Egyptians raised towering needles of stone called obelisks. These tall, slender shafts of granite, square at the base and tapering to a small pyramid at the top, were cut from a single piece of stone. Often standing in pairs before temple gates, they were dedicated to the sun, their gilded tips catching the first light of morning. Carving an obelisk from the living rock, then moving it and raising it upright, was an astonishing feat without modern machines. Some weighed hundreds of tons. They were floated down the river on great barges and lifted into place by the patient labor of many hands. Their sides were carved with the names and deeds of kings. Several still stand today, and others were carried off in later ages to distant cities, where they rise, strange and beautiful, above streets the Egyptians could never have imagined. Egypt was once 2 lands, joined into one by an early king. In the beginning, there was an Upper Egypt to the south, along the narrow valley, and a Lower Egypt to the north, in the broad green delta where the river met the sea. Each had its own crown, its own symbol, and its own identity. According to tradition, a king united the two into a single kingdom, and from then on the pharaoh ruled both. He wore a double crown that combined the tall white crown of the south with the red crown of the north, a quiet emblem of unity. Kings called themselves lords of the 2 lands, and the joining of the two was remembered in art and ritual for thousands of years. So the long story of Egypt began with a gentle bringing together, 2 halves becoming one country along the shared thread of the river. A rearing cobra adorned the brow of every pharaoh. Upon the king's headdress sat the golden image of an upright cobra, hood spread as if ready to strike. This was no mere decoration. The cobra was a protective goddess, believed to guard the ruler and to spit fire at his enemies. Poised on the forehead, she watched over the pharaoh and marked him as royal and divine. The image appears again and again in Egyptian art, a small bright serpent crowning kings and gods alike. Alongside her sometimes was a vulture goddess of the south, the two together representing the united land. There was comfort in the idea that even the mighty pharaoh was watched over and shielded by a guardian of his own. The little golden cobra, fierce and faithful, kept her endless watch upon the royal brow, a quiet promise of protection set in gold. The looped cross called the Ankh was the symbol of life itself. This simple, graceful sign, a cross topped with a loop, appears throughout Egyptian art, held in the hands of gods and kings. It stood for life, for breath, for the living force that fills all things. Gods are often shown offering the Ankh to a pharaoh's lips, granting him the gift of life. It was carved on temple walls, painted on coffins, and worn as a protective charm. Of all the signs the Egyptians used, the Ankh is among the most enduring and beloved, still recognized and worn around the world today. There is a gentle beauty in it, that a whole civilization should hold up a single elegant symbol to mean simply life and carry it everywhere as a quiet blessing. To give the Ankh was to wish another the most precious thing of all, life itself. The Eye of Horus was worn everywhere as a charm of protection and health. This distinctive eye, marked with a curling line beneath it, came from a tender myth in which the god Horus lost his eye in a struggle and had it healed and made whole again. Because of this, the eye became a powerful sign of healing, wholeness, and protection. People wore it as an amulet to guard against harm and illness, and it was tucked among the wrappings of the dead. Sailors painted it on their boats to watch over them on the water. Its parts were even used by scribes as symbols for fractions and measuring grain. Few signs were so widely loved or so often made. The healed eye of a god became, for ordinary people, a small and comforting promise that what is broken can be made whole and that a watchful protection surrounds them. The Egyptians told a moving story of a god who died and rose again. At the heart of their faith was the tale of Osiris, a good king who was killed by his jealous brother and whose body was scattered. His devoted wife, the goddess Isis, searched the land and gathered the pieces, and through her love and magic, Osiris was restored. He did not return to rule the living, but became the gentle lord of the dead, welcoming souls into the afterlife. Their son grew up to reclaim his father's throne. This story of loss, devotion, and renewal lay behind much of Egyptian belief, a promise that death could be overcome and that love endures beyond it. It was retold and reenacted for thousands of years. In its quiet way, it offered comfort that even the gods knew grief and that beyond sorrow lay restoration and peace. The goddess Isis was loved as a mother, healer, and protector. Of all Egypt's many deities, few were as beloved as Isis. She was the devoted wife who restored her husband Osiris, and the tender mother who hid and raised her son in the marshes, protecting him from harm. Because of this, she became a goddess of motherhood, magic, and healing, called upon by ordinary people in times of trouble. Mothers prayed to her over sick children, and her image, cradling her infant son, was treasured in homes across the land. Her worship was so powerful and so comforting that it spread far beyond Egypt, carried across the ancient world. People felt that she understood their sorrows because she had known her own. In Isis, the Egyptians found a divine figure of warmth and tenderness, a protective mother watching gently over the living and the dead alike. The sun god sailed across the sky in a boat each day. To explain the journey of the sun, the Egyptians imagined the great sun god traveling in a celestial boat. By day, he sailed across the heavens from east to west, bringing light and warmth to the world. At dusk, he descended into the underworld, where he journeyed through the hours of the night, facing darkness and danger before rising again renewed at dawn. Each sunrise was therefore a small victory, a rebirth repeated every morning. This daily voyage gave shape to their sense of time and gave deep comfort, for it meant that even after the dark, light would always return. Temples were built to greet the rising sun, and hymns were sung to welcome it. To watch the sun climb over the horizon was to witness each day the oldest and most reassuring story they knew. The jackal-headed god Anubis watched over the dead with care. With the dark head of a jackal, Anubis was the god who guarded the tombs and oversaw the work of mummification. Jackals were seen prowling the edges of the desert cemeteries, and so this creature became, fittingly, the gentle keeper of the dead. Far from being frightening, Anubis was a comforting presence, the careful guide who prepared the body and led the soul toward judgment. Priests performing the rites of embalming sometimes wore his mask, taking on his protective role. He is shown tending the mummy with tender attention, or steadying the great scales on which the heart was weighed. In Anubis, the Egyptians placed their trust that the dead would not be left alone or uncared for, but would be watched over by a faithful guardian through every step of the long passage into the next world. The Egyptians wrote a gentle guidebook for the journey after death. We call it the Book of the Dead, though to them it was a collection of helpful spells and prayers. Written on papyrus and placed in the tomb, it was meant to guide and protect the soul through the trials of the underworld. Its words told the dead what to say, how to answer the guardians, and how to pass safely through each danger toward peace. Many copies were beautifully illustrated, with bright scenes of the soul's journey and the weighing of the heart. The texts were often personalized, the dead person's name written in throughout. It was, in a sense, a traveler's companion for the longest journey of all, full of reassurance. To send the dead off with such a book was an act of love, ensuring they would never be lost or unprepared along the way. Egypt kept its kingdom running through careful counting and records. Behind the temples and pyramids stood a vast, quiet machinery of administration. Scribes counted everything: the height of the flood, the size of the harvest, the heads of cattle, the jars of grain in the stores. Taxes were gathered, usually in goods rather than coins, and recorded with great care. A grand official called the vizier oversaw the running of the land, settling disputes and keeping order on the king's behalf. Every few years, the cattle were counted across the country, an important measure of the kingdom's wealth. It was unglamorous work, but it was the steady backbone of Egyptian life, ensuring that grain was stored against lean years and that the great projects could be fed and supplied. Through patient counting and careful writing, a whole civilization kept itself fed, orderly, and calm across the centuries. The yearly flood was measured carefully to predict the harvest. So much depended on the rising of the Nile that the Egyptians built special structures to measure it, marked with steps or scales to read the water's height. A flood that rose too little meant thin harvests and hungry years. One that rose too high could sweep away homes, but a flood within the right range promised plenty. By reading the water against these marks, officials could predict the size of the coming harvest and even set the level of taxes accordingly. Priests and rulers watched these measurements closely, for they touched the welfare of the whole land. There is something deeply calming in the picture. Each year, quiet men descending stone steps to the river's edge, reading the patient rise of the water, and from it foretelling whether the year ahead would be one of ease or of care. The lotus flower opened each morning and became a symbol of rebirth. Upon the still ponds and slow backwaters of the Nile grew the blue lotus, whose flowers closed at night and sank, then rose and opened again with the morning sun. The Egyptians watched this daily cycle and saw in it a beautiful image of renewal and the rising sun. The lotus became a beloved symbol, carved on columns, painted in tombs, and woven into garlands at feasts. Its sweet scent perfumed gatherings, and guests are often shown holding a single bloom to their noses. The flower was linked to creation itself, for in one story, the sun first rose from a great lotus floating on the waters at the beginning of the world. To hold a lotus was to hold a small emblem of hope, that each night gives way to morning, and that beauty returns with the light. The Egyptians loved music and filled their feasts with gentle sound. Harps, lyres, flutes, and drums accompanied banquets, religious ceremonies, and quiet evenings alike. Tomb paintings show musicians and dancers entertaining guests, their instruments carefully detailed. A favorite was a soft rattle, shaken in temple rituals, whose gentle jingle was thought to please the gods, especially the goddess of joy and music. Singers performed hymns and love songs, some of whose tender words still survive. Music was woven through both worship and pleasure, marking festivals and soothing daily labor, for workers sang together as they pulled and lifted. We cannot now hear the melodies, for they were never written down, but we can see the players and imagine the sound, the pluck of a harp, the breath of a flute, the soft rattle and drum, drifting through a warm Egyptian evening like a lullaby. Egyptian feasts were warm gatherings of food, music, and flowers. When the wealthy entertained, they did so with generous spread and gentle pleasure. Guests arrived in their finest linen, anointed with perfume and adorned with garlands of fresh blossoms. They reclined or sat on cushions, while servants brought roasted meats, fowl, bread, fruit, sweet cakes, and jars of wine and beer. Musicians played softly and dancers moved among the guests. Tomb paintings capture these scenes with loving detail, preserving the warmth of an evening among friends. Such feasts were not wild affairs, but graceful ones, full of conversation, laughter, and the scent of flowers and food. They were a celebration of life's good things, shared in good company. To imagine an Egyptian banquet is to imagine soft lamplight, the murmur of voices, sweet music, and the gentle ease of friends gathered together in the cool of the night. The Egyptians made shimmering beads and charms from glazed faience. This material, made from ground quartz and minerals, could be shaped and fired into objects with a lustrous blue-green glaze, bright as a summer sky. It was used for beads, amulets, small figures, bowls, and tiles, beautiful yet far cheaper than precious stones. The glowing color was prized for its links to life, water, and the heavens. Faience objects were among the most common treasures of Egyptian life, worn by rich and poor alike, and placed in tombs by the thousands. The little shabti figures and scarab charms were often made of it. There is a quiet wonder in the craft, that from sand and minerals, fired in a simple kiln, the Egyptians could conjure such radiant color. These small, glowing things, scattered through homes and graves, carried the brightness of the sky into the everyday lives of ordinary people. Sacred animals were honored, and some were mummified by the millions. The Egyptians saw the divine in many creatures, and certain animals were kept and worshipped as living images of the gods. A particular sacred bull was honored in great splendor, and when it died, it was mourned and buried with royal care. Cats, ibises, falcons, crocodiles, and other animals were bred at temples and, when they died, carefully mummified as offerings to the gods. Vast underground galleries have been found, filled with millions of such animal mummies, each a small act of devotion. Pilgrims would offer them as prayers, much as one might light a candle. It is a gentle, if surprising, expression of faith. A whole landscape of creatures, lovingly preserved and laid to rest, each one a quiet message sent to the gods, asking for blessing, healing, or simple remembrance. The crocodile was both feared and worshipped along the river. The Nile crocodile was one of the few real dangers in Egyptian life, lurking in the shallows and able to take fish, livestock, and the unwary. Yet rather than only fearing it, the Egyptians also honored it as a god of the water and of strength. In certain towns, sacred crocodiles were kept in temple pools, fed by hand, adorned with jewels, and treated with great reverence. When they died, they were mummified and entombed. The crocodile god was prayed to for protection and for the fertility of the waters. It is a striking blend of caution and respect that a creature so dangerous should also be cherished as divine. In honoring the crocodile, the Egyptians made peace, in their way, with the wildness of their river, turning a feared beast into a guardian to be revered rather than only dreaded. A clever household god named Bes watched over homes and sleeping children. Unlike the stately temple gods, Bes was a small, cheerful figure, a stout dwarf with a lion's mane and a friendly, comical face. He was a god of the home, of music and merriment, and above all, a protector of mothers and young children. His image was painted on bedroom walls, carved on beds and headrests, and worn as a charm, for he was believed to frighten away evil spirits and bad dreams. Far from solemn, Bess was loved precisely because he was warm and funny, a guardian who chased away fear with laughter. Parents trusted him to watch over their little ones through the night. There's something deeply comforting in this homely god, a kindly, grinning protector, standing guard beside the cradle, keeping the darkness gentle and the children safe until morning. Boats were the highways of Egypt, carrying everything along the river. With the Nile running the length of the land, almost all travel and trade moved by water. Boats of every size glided up and down the river, from small reed skiffs to great wooden barges. The Egyptians enjoyed a happy convenience of nature. The river flowed northward, so boats could simply drift downstream with the current, while the wind blew mostly southward, filling their sails for the journey up. Grain, stone, cattle, and people all traveled this way, and even the gods were carried by boat in their festivals. So central were boats that they were placed in tombs, and full-size ships were buried beside the pyramids for the king's use in the afterlife. To travel in Egypt was to feel the gentle motion of the water, the land sliding slowly past, the world unhurried and serene. A simple lever called the shaduf lifted water to the fields. To carry water from the river or canal up to the higher fields and gardens, the Egyptians used a clever, patient device. It was a long pole balanced on a frame, with a bucket on one end and a weight on the other. A farmer would pull the bucket down to dip it in the water, then let the counterweight swing it back up and tip it into a channel above. Hour after hour, the bucket rose and fell in a slow, steady rhythm. This humble tool let them water their crops even when the flood had withdrawn, greening the land through the dry months. It is still used in places today, little changed. The soft creak of the shaduf and the splash of water were among the quiet, repeated sounds of the Egyptian countryside, the patient music of growing food. Egyptian farmers harvested grain with curved blades and sang as they worked. When the fields had ripened to gold, the harvest began, a busy and joyful time. Reapers moved through the wheat and barley with short, curved sickles, edged at first with sharp flakes of stone and later with bronze. Behind them, others gathered the cut stalks into bundles. The grain was carried to the threshing floor, where cattle walked over it to loosen the kernels, and workers tossed it into the air so the breeze could carry away the chaff. Tomb paintings show these scenes in cheerful detail, and texts tell us the workers sang together as they labored. The gathered grain was stored in rounded granaries against the coming year. It was hard work under the sun, but it was also hopeful work. the yearly reward of the river's gift, ending in full stores and quiet relief. The Egyptians made wine as well as beer, pressing it from their vineyards. While beer was the everyday drink, wine was the finer one, enjoyed especially by the wealthy and offered to the gods. Grapevines were grown on trellises in the gardens of the delta, and at harvest the grapes were gathered and trodden underfoot in great vats, the juice running off to ferment in sealed jars. Some jars were even labeled with the year, the vineyard, and the name of the winemaker, an early kind of vintage. Red wine was the most common, and it appeared at feasts and festivals, poured for guests and gods alike. Winemaking is shown in colorful tomb scenes, from picking to pressing to storing. To share a cup of wine at an Egyptian banquet was a mark of celebration and plenty, a sweet pleasure drawn from the sun-warmed vines of the riverside. A great temple at Karnak grew over many centuries into a forest of stone. Near the city of Thebes, generation after generation of pharaohs added to a vast temple complex until it became one of the largest religious sites ever built. Its most famous hall is filled with enormous columns, so tall and so many that walking among them feels like wandering through a forest of stone trees. The columns were shaped and painted to resemble papyrus and lotus plants, their tops opening like great flowers. Once roofed and dim, lit only by shafts of light from high windows, the hall must have felt hushed and holy. Each king who added to it left his name and his offerings. Karnak was not built all at once, but grew slowly, like a living thing over more than 1,000 years. To stand among its columns is to feel very small and very calm. Egyptian temples were thought of as the earthly homes of the gods. A temple was not a place for crowds to gather and worship, as we might imagine, but the private house of a god, where the divine image dwelled. Deep inside, in a dim and sacred inner room, stood the statue of the god, tended only by priests. Each day, they performed gentle rituals, washing the statue, dressing it in fresh linen, offering it food and incense, and singing soft hymns, as one might care for an honored guest. Ordinary people remained in the outer courts and met their gods mainly at festivals. The temple was kept pure and quiet, a still point where heaven and earth were thought to meet. There is a deep calm in the idea. A hushed inner room, a single tended image, and the daily loving care of those who served the god in silence. On festival days, the gods left their temples and traveled among the people. Though the gods lived hidden in their temples, on certain holy days, they came out to meet their worshippers. Their statues, veiled within small shrines, were lifted onto the shoulders of priests in the form of sacred boats and carried in grand processions. Crowds lined the way to glimpse the passing of the god, singing, dancing, and offering flowers. One great festival carried the god of Thebes along the river and the avenues between temples, a joyful holiday for the whole city. Another brought families across the river to feast cheerfully beside the tombs of their ancestors, sharing food with the dead. These festivals broke the year with color and gladness, drawing people together. They were the bright communal heart of Egyptian religion, days when the distant gods drew near and the whole community rejoiced beneath the sun. The goddess Hathor brought joy, love, music, and the comfort of the evening. Often shown as a gentle cow or as a woman crowned with horns and a sun disk, Hathor was among the most beloved of goddesses. She was the patroness of love, beauty, music, and dance, and also a nurturing mother who welcomed the dead in the West where the sun set. People celebrated her with music and rejoicing, shaking soft rattles in her honor. As goddess of the western mountains, she was thought to receive the setting sun and the souls of the departed with tenderness, like a mother gathering her children at the end of the day. In Hathor, the Egyptians joined the pleasures of life, love, and music and beauty, with the gentle peace of the evening and of death. She was, in a sense, the goddess of all sweet endings, of rest after joy. The ibis-headed god Thoth was the patron of writing, wisdom, and the moon. With the head of a long-beaked ibis, Thoth was believed to have given humankind the gift of writing and to keep the records of the gods. He was the divine scribe, present at the weighing of the heart, noting each soul's fate with his reed pen. As god of wisdom, he watched over scholars, scribes, and all learning, and he was linked to the moon, whose changing light measured the months. Scribes honored him as their patron and protector, and the sacred ibis was kept and mummified in his name by the millions. In Thoth, the Egyptians celebrated the quiet power of knowledge, the magic of marks on a page that could hold a voice forever. He was the gentle keeper of wisdom and time, recording the world with patience and care beneath the silver light of the moon. One pharaoh tried to change Egypt's gods to worship a single sun disk. In a remarkable episode, the pharaoh we call Akhenaten turned away from the old gods and devoted himself to a single divine power. The disk of the sun, whose rays reached down like gentle hands. He built a new capital in the desert, raised open-air temples to the light, and encouraged a softer, more natural style of art. For a brief time, the ancient gods were set aside in favor of this one shining presence. Beside him stood his famous queen, celebrated for her beauty. But the change was too sudden and too strange for most people, and after his death, the old gods were lovingly restored, and his new city was abandoned to the sand. It remains one of the most fascinating chapters of Egyptian history, a quiet, sunlit experiment that flowered briefly and then gently faded away. A bust of Queen Nefertiti remains one of the most beautiful images of the ancient world. Nefertiti was the queen beside the sun, worshipping Pharaoh, and she seems to have held unusual power and prominence at his side. She is remembered above all for a single sculpted portrait, a painted bust discovered in the workshop of an ancient artist. Its serene face, graceful neck, and gentle expression have made it one of the most admired works of art ever found, calm and timeless. Beyond her beauty, Nefertiti played a real role in the religious changes of her husband's reign, shown worshipping the sun alongside him as an equal. Much about her life remains a quiet mystery, including how it ended, but her sculpted face endures, gazing softly across the ages. In that one serene portrait, the whole grace of a vanished court seems gathered and gently preserved. The pharaoh Ramesses the Great ruled for an astonishing 66 years. Few kings reigned so long or left so deep a mark. Ramesses II came to the throne as a young man and held it for well over 6 decades, outliving many of his own children. He filled the land with monuments, raising temples, statues, and cities, and carving his name on stone across the kingdom. He fathered a great many children and lived to a remarkable old age for his time. So long and so prosperous was his reign that several later kings took his name in his honor. By the time he died, most of his subjects had never known another pharaoh. His was an age of stability and grandeur, remembered as a kind of golden evening. To his people, he must have seemed almost eternal, a steady presence ruling gently on, year after peaceful year. Rameses carved an entire temple into a mountainside, aligned with the sun. At the southern edge of Egypt, the great king cut a temple directly into the living rock of a cliff, fronted by four colossal seated statues of himself, each enormous and serene. Deep inside, the builders aligned the corridor so precisely that, on 2 days each year, the rising sun would shine all the way into the heart of the mountain and light the statues of the gods in the innermost room. It was a breathtaking feat of planning and devotion. In modern times, when a dam threatened to flood the site, the entire temple was carefully cut apart and lifted block by block to higher ground where it stands today. The great stone faces still gaze out over the water, calm and patient, catching the first light of morning as they have for more than 3,000 years. Egypt, an rival empire, signed one of the world's first peace treaties. After years of conflict, Rameses the Great and the king of a powerful neighboring empire grew weary of war and agreed to make peace. They set down their agreement in writing, promising friendship, mutual defense, and the return of those who fled between their lands. Copies are kept by both sides, and remarkably, versions have survived from each, allowing us to read the same treaty from both points of view. It is among the earliest surviving peace treaties in all of history. After the great battle that had tested them both, the two powers chose, in the end, the quieter path of friendship over endless fighting. There is something hopeful in it, that even among ancient kings, the wisdom to lay down arms and write down peace could prevail, its gentle promise preserved in stone and clay. The Egyptians practiced an early form of dentistry and cared for their teeth. The bread of ancient Egypt, ground on stone, often carried grit and sand that slowly wore down the teeth, so dental troubles were common. In response, Egyptian healers gave attention to the mouth, and we know of physicians who specialized in teeth. They prepared soothing pastes and remedies to ease pain and treat gums, and there is evidence of efforts to steady loose teeth with fine threads of gold wire. People also used early forms of breath freshening and tooth cleaning, chewing herbs and making pastes to keep the mouth pleasant. While they could not cure everything, their careful attention shows a gentle concern for comfort and health. Across the long centuries, the small human wished to ease a toothache and keep a clean, fresh smile was already there, quietly tended by Egypt's patient healers. Egyptian healers even devised an early test to predict a coming child. Among their many medical writings is a curious and clever idea. To learn whether a woman was expecting a child, she was asked to moisten bags of wheat and barley grains over several days. If the grains sprouted, it was taken as a sign of new life on the way. Astonishingly, when this old test was examined in modern times, it showed a surprising hint of real effect, for reasons the ancients could not have known. It was bound up, of course, with prayer and ritual, as all their medicine was. But it reflects a careful habit of observing the world and looking for patterns in it. In that simple bowl of sprouting grain, we glimpse the same patient curiosity that ran through all of Egyptian science. A quiet watching of nature, seeking gentle signs of what was to come. A noblewoman was buried with a carved wooden toe and early artificial limb. Among the tender discoveries from ancient Egypt is a small, beautifully made toe of wood and leather found fitted to the foot of a mummified woman. It shows signs of having been worn and adjusted in life, not merely placed there for burial, which makes it one of the earliest known working artificial body parts. Someone crafted it carefully so that she could walk and wear her sandals with comfort and dignity. It is a small object, but a deeply human one. Behind it lies a story of care, of a person who lost a toe, and of the skilled hands that made her a new one, so that she might move through her days with ease. Across thousands of years, that little wooden toe speaks softly of kindness, ingenuity, and the simple wish to help another walk on. The Egyptians divided the night by watching the stars. Long before clocks, they learned to tell the passing of the night hours by the rising of certain stars. They mapped groups of stars whose appearances marked the hours, and a skilled observer could read the time of night by which star stood where in the sky. They also measured time by simpler means: shadow sticks that tracked the moving sun by day, and water clocks, vessels that let water drip slowly out through a small hole, the falling level marking the passing hours. With these patient tools, they ordered their rituals and their work. There is deep peace in the picture of an Egyptian priest upon a rooftop in the dark, watching the slow wheel of the stars to know the hour. They found time not in machines, but in the gentle, certain movements of the heavens above them. After each flood, surveyors stretched ropes to mark out the fields again. When the Nile rose and covered the land, it erased the boundaries between one farmer's plot and the next. So once the water withdrew, officials went out with long, knotted ropes to measure and mark the fields anew, restoring each family's share. This yearly task of measuring the land is thought to have helped give birth to the science of geometry, the measuring of the earth itself. The rope stretchers worked with care, for fairness depended on them, and their measurements decided taxes and harvests. It was patient, practical work, repeated every year, surely as the flood. From this humble need to fairly divide the fertile mud grew skills in measurement and calculation that would echo through the ages. The gift of the river, it turned out, included not only rich soil, but the quiet beginnings of mathematics. The Egyptians built a great lighthouse that guided ships for centuries. In later times, in the city of Alexandria on the northern coast, they raised an enormous tower upon an island in the harbor, crowned with a fire that burned through the night. By day, its great height marked the way to port, and by night its flame, magnified by a mirror, could be seen far out across the dark water, guiding sailors safely home. It was counted among the wonders of the ancient world, and stood for many centuries, one of the tallest structures on earth. Travelers marveled at it, and its fame spread across the seas. In time, earthquakes brought it down, and its stones were used to build a fort. But for hundreds of years, its steady light watched over the harbor, a warm and welcoming beacon shining out into the night for every weary ship seeking rest. The city of Alexandria held a great library that tried to gather all knowledge. In that same northern city stood a famous library, a center of learning that aimed to collect every book in the world. Scrolls were gathered from across the known lands, copied by patient scribes, and stored in their thousands. Scholars came from distant places to study there, to read, to teach, and to make discoveries in mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and geography. It was one of the greatest gatherings of human knowledge the ancient world ever knew, a quiet house of wisdom beside the sea. Much of what it held was sadly lost over the centuries, a gentle sorrow to all who love learning. But the dream behind it endures, the beautiful idea that all the world's knowledge might be gathered in one calm place and shared, so that each generation could build gently upon the last. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of ancient Egypt. After her, the long line of kings that had stretched back thousands of years came finally to its end. She was a clever and capable ruler in a difficult age, when the great power of Rome was rising and Egypt's independence was slipping away. Through intelligence, charm, and careful alliance, she sought to protect her kingdom and keep it free. For a time she succeeded, ruling with skill and ambition. But the tide of history was against her, and with her death, Egypt passed at last under foreign rule. She has been remembered ever since, her story told and retold across the ages. With Cleopatra, the world of the pharaohs gently closed, the final chapter of a story that had begun with the first kings along the river, countless quiet centuries before. Cleopatra was not Egyptian by blood, yet she embraced Egypt deeply. She came from a line of Greek rulers, descended from a general of Alexander the Great, who had taken the throne after his conquest. For nearly 300 years, this Greek family ruled Egypt, often keeping their own language and customs. Cleopatra, however, was different. She is said to have learned to speak many languages, and she may have been the first of her line to truly learn the Egyptian tongue. She honored the old gods and presented herself as a true Egyptian queen, taking part in the ancient rituals. She seems to have loved the land she ruled and wished to be one with it. In this, she was unusual among her family, reaching back across centuries to embrace the deep traditions of Egypt, so that the last pharaoh was also in spirit a devoted one. Even after the pharaohs were gone, Egypt's old temples lived on for centuries. When Egypt became a distant province of a great foreign empire, its ancient religion did not vanish at once. In the temples along the river, priests still woke each day to wash and dress the gods, to burn incense and sing the old hymns, just as they had for thousands of years. The carving of hieroglyphs continued for a time, and festivals still drew the faithful. Slowly, over the long centuries, the old ways faded as new beliefs spread across the land. The last temples eventually fell silent, the last priests passed on, and the knowledge of the sacred signs was lost. But for a remarkably long while, the gentle daily rituals carried on in the shadowed sanctuaries, a quiet, fading echo of a world that had once filled the whole valley with worship. The Egyptians imagined the sky as a goddess arching over the earth. To explain the heavens, they pictured a great goddess named Nut, her star-covered body stretched across the sky, touching the horizon with her hands and feet. Below her lay the earth, and between them rose the air that held them apart. Each evening, it was said, she swallowed the sun which traveled through her body in the darkness, to be born again from her at dawn. The stars were upon her, and the whole sky was her form, bending protectively over the world. It is a tender and beautiful image. The night sky not as cold and empty, but as a living, sheltering presence, a mother curved above the sleeping earth. To lie beneath the stars in Egypt was to rest beneath her gaze, safe under the great dark arch of a goddess who held the heavens gently in place. The Egyptians linked the soul of Osiris to the stars of Orion. Watching the night sky, they connected the bright stars we call Orion with their god of the dead and of rebirth, Osiris. As that constellation rose, it seemed to them a sign of the god moving through the heavens. The shining band of the Milky Way may have been seen as a great river in the sky, mirroring their own Nile below. In this way, the patterns of the stars were woven into their deepest beliefs about life, death, and renewal. The same stars that we still see wheeling overhead were, to them, full of meaning and comfort. To gaze upward on a clear Egyptian night was to look upon their gods and their hopes, written in light across the dark, the heavens and the earth quietly reflecting one another in the stillness. The Egyptians believed a person was made of several spirits, not one. To them, a human being was more than a body. There was the life force, breathed into a person at birth and sustained by food and offerings even after death. There was also a kind of soul that could move freely, often pictured as a small bird with a human face, flying out from the tomb by day and returning at night. And there was the name and the shadow, each a real part of the self. For a person to live on after death, these parts had to be kept whole and nourished, which is why the body was preserved and offerings were made. It is a thoughtful and gentle vision of what we are. Not a single thing, but a quiet gathering of life, soul, name, and shadow, each tended with care so that the whole person might endure. Families fed their dead with offerings at carved false doors. In tombs and shrines, the Egyptians carved a special doorway in the stone, a door that could not open, for it was meant for the spirit alone. Through this false door, it was believed, the soul could pass between the world of the dead and the world of the living to receive the gifts left for it. Before it stood a table for offerings of bread, beer, and other good things. Living relatives would bring food and pour water, speaking the name of the departed and keeping their memory warm. In this gentle practice, the dead were not abandoned but cared for, remembered, and fed, remaining a quiet part of the family. It is a tender thought that love did not end at the grave, but continued in small, steady acts of remembrance, a meal shared across the threshold between two worlds. To the Egyptians, the land of the dead lay in the west, where the sun set, because the sun sank each evening in the west and rose renewed in the east. The western horizon became linked with death, and the east with rebirth. So the Egyptians buried their dead on the western bank of the river, beneath the desert hills where the sun went down. To die was gently spoken of as going to the west, and the dead were sometimes called the Westerners. The goddess of the western mountain welcomed them as the sun was welcomed each night. There is deep peace in this gentle geography of the soul, that death was simply a setting, like the sun's, and that beyond the darkness lay a sure and certain dawn. Each evening, as the sun slipped behind the western cliffs, the Egyptians watched a quiet promise that endings lead in time to new beginnings. The Egyptians believed that to speak a name was to keep a person alive. A name was not just a label, but a vital part of who someone was, holding a piece of their very being. To have one's name spoken and remembered was, in a sense, to go on living. This is why names were carved on tombs and monuments, repeated in prayers, and written again and again, so that they would never be forgotten. To erase a name was a serious act, a way of trying to undo a person entirely. And so the Egyptians took great care to preserve names, both their own and those of their loved ones. It is a beautiful and comforting belief, and one that holds a quiet truth even now. For in remembering and speaking the names of those who came before, we do keep something of them with us, alive and warm in our memory. Magic was woven gently through every part of Egyptian life. To the Egyptians, magic was not strange or forbidden, but a natural force in the world, as real as wind or water. They called upon it for protection, for healing, and for help in daily troubles. Spoken words, written charms, and small rituals were used to ward off illness, to guard children, and to ensure safe travel. Amulets shaped like gods and sacred symbols were worn for luck and kept by the bedside. Healers blended their remedies with spells, seeing no division between the two. Magic was a way of asking the unseen world for kindness, of feeling less alone before the dangers of life. There is comfort in such a view, a world in which a few quiet words or a small charm could call protection close. and in which the ordinary person held in their own hands a gentle power to keep harm away. The Egyptians looked to dreams for guidance and messages. They believed that in sleep, the soul could touch the unseen world, and that dreams might carry meaning, warnings, or comfort from the gods. Scribes even kept guides that listed dreams and what they were thought to foretell, so that a person might understand a strange night vision. Some travelers would sleep in sacred places, hoping for a healing or helpful dream from a god. A dream of certain things meant good fortune. Others were thought to warn of trouble. In this way, the quiet hours of sleep were not empty, but full of possible meaning, a time when the divine might draw near. There is something fitting and gentle in it, that a people so attentive to life should also listen closely to their dreams, trusting that even in the deepest rest, wisdom and reassurance might quietly find them. The dry desert preserved the treasures of Egypt for thousands of years. So much of what we know of ancient Egypt survives because of the gift of a dry climate. In the hot, rainless sands, things that would have rotted away in damp lands were kept almost untouched. Wooden furniture, painted linen, baskets, food, flowers, and delicate papyrus scrolls. Bright colors stayed fresh on tomb walls, sealed away from light and air. Even the bodies of people and animals were naturally preserved. The desert became a vast, patient keeper of the past, holding its treasures gently through the ages until they were found again. Because of this quiet preservation, we can look upon objects touched by hands thousands of years ago, as though little time had passed. The same fierce sun and sand that made life hard also became, in the end, the great protector of Egypt's long and gentle memory. Many royal tombs were quietly robbed in ancient times, not modern ones. For all the care taken to hide and protect them, the tombs of the pharaohs, filled with gold and treasure, were a great temptation. Most were entered and emptied, not in recent centuries, but in ancient times, sometimes only years after they were sealed. Records survive of investigations into such robberies, with officials questioning suspects and inspecting the violated tombs. To guard against this, priests later gathered the bodies of many kings and hid them together in secret places, where they rested safely for thousands of years. It is a strangely human story of greed and of the quiet efforts to protect the dead from it. And yet, through all of it, enough survived, hidden or overlooked, that the splendor of ancient Egypt could still, in time, be rediscovered and gently brought back into the light. The famous idea of a mummy's curse is mostly a modern story. When the untouched tomb of the boy king was opened in modern times, a few of those involved later died, and newspapers spun a thrilling tale of an ancient curse striking down all who disturb the dead. It made for an exciting story, and it spread quickly around the world. But in truth, most of those present lived long and ordinary lives, and there is no real evidence of any curse at all. The ancient Egyptians did sometimes write warnings to protect their tombs, but the dramatic legend grew mostly in our own imagination. The real magic of the tomb was not a curse, but its treasures and its tender care for the dead. It is a gentler truth, and a kinder one, that the long sleep of the pharaohs holds not danger, but only the quiet beauty of a world preserved. A great expedition of scholars helped reawaken the world's love of Egypt. A little over 2 centuries ago, a foreign army came to Egypt, and with it traveled a host of scholars, artists, and scientists who set about studying the ancient land. They measured the temples, sketched the monuments, and recorded everything they saw. publishing it later in great illustrated volumes that amazed readers everywhere. It was on this expedition that the famous inscribed stone was found, which would later unlock the hieroglyphs. Their careful work helped spark a wave of fascination with Egypt that has never since faded. From that time on, scholars devoted their lives to understanding the civilization, slowly piecing its story back together. The patient curiosity that the Egyptians themselves once showed toward the stars and the river was now turned lovingly upon them, drawing their long, quiet history gently back into the light of memory. Egyptian obelisks now stand in cities far across the world. Over the long centuries, several of the great stone needles raised by the pharaohs were carried away to distant lands, where they still stand today in the hearts of modern cities. They rise in public squares and beside rivers, ancient and serene amid the bustle of places the Egyptians never knew. Moving these enormous stones across the sea was a difficult feat even in modern times. Now they stand quietly under foreign skies, their carved faces still bearing the names of kings who ruled beside the Nile thousands of years ago. There is something both wistful and wonderful in it, that a shaft of granite, shaped to catch the Egyptian sun, should end its long journey in a far-off city, keeping its silent watch over new streets and new people, a gentle traveler from the ancient world still standing tall. Today, we can still look upon the faces of the pharaohs themselves. Because the Egyptians preserved their dead so carefully, the actual bodies of many kings and queens have survived to our own time, resting now in quiet museum halls. We can stand before the very face of a pharaoh who ruled 3,000 years ago, see the shape of his features, the set of his jaw, even the color of his hair. It is a profound and humbling thing, this meeting across the ages. These were living people once, who loved and worried and laughed and grew old, and through the patient care of their own age, they remain. They are treated now with renewed respect and gentleness. To look upon such a face is to feel the great gulf of time grow suddenly small, and to sense, quietly, the deep kinship between ourselves and those who lived so very long ago. The monuments of Egypt have outlasted empires beyond counting. Since the pyramids first rose at Giza, countless kingdoms and empires have risen, flourished, and crumbled away. Conquerors have come and gone, languages have been born and forgotten, whole ways of life have passed into memory. And through it all, the great stone monuments of Egypt have simply stood, patient and unmoved, beneath the same sun and stars. They have watched more history than almost anything else made by human hands. There is a deep and steadying calm in their endurance, a sense of permanence in a changing world. Whatever storms passed over the land, the pyramids remained, the temples kept their place, the carved kings gazed on. To stand among them is to feel time itself slow down and to take quiet comfort in the thought that some things, made with enough love and care, can last almost forever. And still, after all these thousands of years, the Nile flows on. The great river that gave birth to Egypt has never stopped. It rises in the far south and runs its long, patient course to the sea, just as it did when the first farmers pressed seeds into its mud, when the pyramids were built, when Cleopatra sailed upon it. Cities have grown and fallen along its banks. Gods have been worshipped and forgotten, but the river simply continues, calm and steady and sure. In its endless flowing, there is a gentle lesson the Egyptians seemed always to know, that life moves in quiet cycles, that the waters return, that each ending makes way for a beginning. The same river that carried their boats still shines under the moon tonight. And so the long story of Egypt does not really end. Like the river, it flows quietly onward into the dark and toward the dawn. Tonight we wandered together through the long and gentle world of ancient Egypt. We drifted down the Nile and watched the flood bring life to the fields. We stood before the great pyramids, and the calm gaze of the Sphinx, lingered in painted tombs, and listened to the soft music of a riverside feast. We met scribes and gardeners, queens and quiet gods, cats asleep in the lamplight, and children at play in the warm dust. And through it all ran the slow, steady river, carrying everything gently onward. There is nothing left now to do or to know. When you're ready, another quiet journey will be waiting here for you, ready to carry you onward into another evening. If these calm hours help you rest, a gentle follow helps other tired minds find the softer place to land. But for now, simply let it all fade. Let your breathing slow, let your thoughts grow soft and dim, and let the last warm light sink behind the western hills. There's nothing to hold on to and nowhere you need to be. Rest well and sweet dreams.